Oscar-winning actor Geoffrey Rush says his name's been smeared and reputation damaged unjustifiably by claims of inappropriate behaviour. He's vigorously denied the accusations from when he performed with the Sydney Theatre Company, insisting he's always acted professionally.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And yet another famous face from the entertainment industry is fighting allegations of sexual misconduct after this front-page shocker in the Daily Telegraph.
King Lear. World exclusive. Oscar winner Rush denies inappropriate behaviour during Sydney stage show.
Rush's denial was certainly emphatic, but it didn't stop the telly jumping to judgment or following up with a double-page spread inside that also found him guilty.
Stars barred behaviour.
Although the telly was unable to tell its readers what Rush was actually guilty of. And the actor's lawyer claimed in a statement that Rush had known nothing about the complaint until the telly contacted him.
Not to afford a person their right to know what's been alleged against them, let alone not inform them of it, but release such information to the public, is both a denial of justice.
The alleged incident dates back to late 2015, when Rush was playing King Lear in the Sydney Theatre Company production. The complainant, an unnamed female cast member, did not want to go public or Rush to be told. But when the telly asked the question, STC management said it had to admit a complaint had been made. And that sparked headlines right around the world, from Hollywood to New York to London and beyond. Although for them, the denial was the story. But getting back to that original telly headline, King Lear, was a single, unspecified, uncorroborated complaint from a woman who wouldn't be named enough for such a public condemnation. The Sydney Morning Herald's Andrew Hornery thought not.
So, 250 accounts collated involving Don Burke, one against Geoffrey Rush, we know very little about and denied by Rush. Journalists should exercise a little caution, perhaps. The damage can be irreparable.
And Hornery was not the only one to hold that view.
Here's an unknown allegation from an unknown person about something unknown, and he's got to answer that. I think that's a little... And he says he's done nothing wrong. I think this might have stepped over a line.
More significantly, Andrew Bolt's editors at the Herald Sun apparently agreed with him. Because while Brisbane's Courier Mail and Adelaide's Advertiser both ran the Rush story in Thursday's paper, it was nowhere to be seen in News Corp's Melbourne tabloid. And shortly after the telly's exclusive went up online, an email from Herald Sun Deputy Editor Chris Tinkler warned his journos to steer well clear.
Important notice for all staff. Do not retweet or post any articles regarding Geoffrey Rush.
Soon afterwards, a follow-up text message from another newsroom leader warned,
Please, under no circumstances, retweet, share, like, repost any stories about Geoffrey Rush on social media, etc. until further notice. The telly are running with a yarn which is highly libellous.
But no such caution at the telly, with Rush splashed across page one again on Friday.
We're with you. Theatre cast back accuser as Rush denies touching.
That follow-up relied on messages of support for the complainant posted on social media. And apart from the word touching, it had no new details or witnesses and no further allegations. So, did the telly jump the gun? As 2GB's Ben Fordham observed to entertainment reporter Peter Ford,
there's a real media rush on this. Probably about 3 weeks ago, I was told that, yes, someone's preparing something on Geoffrey Rush. Now, what do other people in the media do? They all then think, OK, I want to get ahead of the curve here, so they then try and work out what the story is, and essentially someone's gone to Geoffrey Rush to say, have you got something to hide? He says, I don't know what it is, and now that's the story.
Yeah, I think it's almost like the Daily Telegraph couldn't wait to cook the pudding. They just felt they had to serve it up, and they hadn't really cooked it properly. That's my feeling. They know they've got a story, and they have got a very good story if they can firm it up.
But at the moment, the story is not firm at all. As Nine's Damien Ryan summed it up,
A claim and a denial and not much else. Where to on this latest scandal remains unclear. So far the police are staying out of it and the case remains in the court of public opinion.
And that is the problem, because the damage is already done. To Rush, his family and the alleged victim, whose identity is now well known. The charges against Don Burke, levelled by the ABC in Fairfax, involved multiple incidents of harassment or assault against multiple women, testifying on the record. The charges against Rush are almost as harmful, but far more flimsy. Certainly, they ought to be investigated. But if the complainant won't go public and no others come forward, the telly could find itself on the wrong end of a very expensive defamation action. It cost Bauer magazines around $7 million when they claimed Rebel Wilson had made up stories about her childhood. Geoffrey Rush is just as big a star, and in the current climate, even more likely to be dropped by Hollywood. For everyone's sake, the telly should have waited till it had evidence before convicting him. And while we're on the subject of serious allegations that may or may not be true, let's see what we can learn from a sting on the Washington Post that backfired. Here is part of the showdown.
We're busy right now.
Well, here's the problem.
We're running through a meeting.
Someone approached the Washington Post reporter saying that she was impregnated by Roy Moore.
Here's the problem.
Was that truthful or was that...
Here's the problem.
No.
The problem is we're busy.
So, what's it all about? Well, politics, bad behaviour and the battle for truth about this man. Roy Moore is a former Chief Justice in the state of Alabama and the Republican candidate in a vital US Senate election. Until 3 weeks ago, he looked certain to get the job. But then the Washington Post published this bombshell report.
Woman says Roy Moore initiated sexual encounter when she was 14, he was 32.
Back in the 1970s, according to the Post, Moore drove 14-year-old Lee Kaufman to his home in the woods, where he
told her how pretty she was and kissed her. On a second visit, she says, he took off her shirt and pants and removed his clothes. He touched her over her bra and underpants.
9 women have now come forward with similar or less serious allegations against Moore, and his chances of becoming Alabama's next US Senator have plummeted. And that is despite the efforts of Moore's media supporters on the conservative side of politics, who've done their best to discredit the claims. But last week, the Post revealed a far more audacious attempt to cast doubt on it all.
A woman approached the Post with dramatic and false tale about Roy Moore. She appears to be part of undercover sting operation.
As the Post explained, a woman called Jamie Phillips approached the paper with the sensational claim that in the 1990s, as a 15-year-old, she had had a sexual relationship with Moore and aborted his child. But the Post reporters smelt a rat, confronted Phillips in this taped interview, and asked her about a GoFundMe request in which she'd said she planned to expose liberal media bias. And before long, the would-be informant was leading them to the New York offices of Project Veritas. And who are they? Good question. Project Veritas is an ultra-conservative organisation dedicated to exposing corruption, dishonesty and liberal media bias, whose founder James O'Keefe is proud of the trouble he's been causing.
The entire media establishment is against Project Veritas for good reason. We're challenging their credibility, their veracity and their monopoly. We are an existential threat to them.
But on this occasion, it was Project Veritas that took a bashing. Because, having tracked Moore's pretend victim to their offices, the Washington Post reporters confronted O'Keefe and a colleague and had them running for cover.
Does Jamie Phillips work for Project Veritas? Did you guys send her to speak to pose as a victim of Roy Moore to the Washington Post?
I'm 15 minutes late to this meeting, so okay. I gotta run. But we will get in touch with you, okay?
I just want to make clear, if we report that this woman works at Project Veritas, if you dispute that.
I am not doing an interview right now, so
we're done.
I'm not going to say a word, okay?
Later, O'Keefe did talk to the Washington Post, but according to the paper, did not say much more.
O'Keefe declined to answer repeated questions about whether the woman was employed at Project Veritas. He also did not respond when asked if he was working with Moore, former White House advisor and Moore supporter Stephen K. Bannon, or Republican strategists.
The Washington Post filmed that encounter as well, in its entirety, as did O'Keefe. So then, hilariously, we had 2 competing videos, except the Project Veritas version, which O'Keefe posted on Twitter, conveniently edited out all the questions he'd refused to answer. And what's the wash-up? Well, a clear victory for the Washington Post and good old-fashioned fact-checking, which, of course, is the lesson for Australia. But now, let's hop on a flight to the City of Love, which has suddenly captured the hearts of several Australian journalists, all at the same moment.
Emmanuel Macron and his glamorous wife Brigitte entertained at the Elysee Palace in Paris on Monday.
So, how come they all decided it was time to do a story? Well, as they all admitted, they were paid to go. And who can blame them? And while the coverage was mostly glowing, there was nothing terrible they failed to tell their readers. Which is more than you can say for this puff in the West Australian about a trade mission to a celebrated Central Asian dictatorship.
Baku to the future. The unlikely love affair between Perth and Baku business.
Haven't heard of the affair between WA and Azerbaijan? Nor had we, until the West devoted a 3-page spread to the exciting news, telling us
there are some striking similarities between Perth and Baku. Both are secular, well-educated societies with a love for good food and wine and a quirky appreciation of Eurovision.
And, of course, they're both freedom-loving democracies. Although, bizarrely, in 2013, Azerbaijan's president, Ilham Aliyev, was so popular that he was voted in for a third term before the polls even opened.
Oops! Azerbaijan released election results before voting had even started.
And so popular that 2 years later, the major opposition parties didn't even bother showing up, with the BBC noting,
in the past 2 years, the Azeri authorities have jailed almost all critical voices, among them journalists, civil society activists and human rights lawyers.
None of that made it into the West's 3-page feature. And nor did we learn that the country ranks 162 out of 180 on the World Press Freedom Index, behind Iraq and Egypt. But, to be fair, this was an article about how Australians could do business there. And as the paper gushed,
Azerbaijan's impressive financial statistics, its opportunities and the raft of government incentives are dazzling, to say the least.
But what about corruption, I hear you ask, which is something that businessmen need to know about. Down in the 47th paragraph, the West Australian assured us they're sorting all that out.
The government has made a concerted effort to address perceptions of corruption, following Azerbaijan's 119th ranking out of 168 countries, alongside Russia, in the World Bank's Transparency International's 2015 Corruption Perceptions Index.
Yep, 119 out of 168. And that's before this year's scandal about the Azerbaijani laundromat, in which $2.9 billion was laundered out of the country into offshore bank accounts of Azerbaijani leaders, or to pay off friendly European politicians and sympathetic journalists. That merited just one paragraph in the West story, which assured us that
current allegations appear to be political rather than corporate.
Ah, well, that's all right then. So, who funded this PR jaunt for the paper? Yes, you've guessed.
The reporter's trip was paid for by the Azerbaijan consulate.
Surprise, surprise. Now, we're not suggesting that the West Australian has had millions of dollars pumped through its bank accounts, but accepting free flights and hotels from a corrupt country that locks up journalists and then ignoring or downplaying the country's problems is not a good look. The West Australia disagrees and says it did cover the country's problems adequately. And now, a significant farewell. Yes, time is up for Lateline after almost 3 decades on air. It's been home to some of the ABC's hottest talent, most notably Kerry O'Brien.
Welcome to Lateline, a program that promises something new in Australian television.
Maxine McHugh, Lee Sales, Emma Alberici, and, of course, Tony Jones.
Tonight we dig into the misty public record of Mark Latham's financial management as Mayor of Sydney's Liverpool Council in the early 1990s.
Jones got a Walkley Award for that, and another 2 from his Lateline interviews. And the programme's received others over the years, including for its reports leading up to the 91 Soviet coup, and on an alleged cover-up by clergy and police of child sex abuse in the Newcastle area. But after surviving a close call 3 years ago, with ABC budgets now under increasing pressure, Lateline was finally axed, with the final show coming this Friday. The ABC is at pains to point out that changing audience habits means redeploying resources.
The ABC will establish an investigations unit of 10 investigative reporters and a specialist reporting team to work across all platforms.
But it's a loss that has frustrated Lateline's first presenter, Kerry O'Brien.
The program was an opportunity to bring thoughtful, provocative conversations to Australian audiences, who otherwise would not have that. I would argue we need that reflective stuff more now than ever.
And one of the original creators of the program, Peter Manning, agrees.
The ABC has run the program into the ground in the last few years, changing presenters, budget cuts, new formats. Australian audiences deserve a Lateline, more like the one O'Brien and McHugh presented.
Chris Mitchell, long-time former editor-in-chief of The Australian, was a fan of Lateline in its heyday, but wrote recently,
programming always has to change. Newish managing director Michelle Guthrie is probably on a winner with her new focus on investigative news.
And there has been excellent work from the ABC's beefed-up national reporting team in full flight this past week on the Don Burke allegations.
730 has spoken to many women for this story who all describe a man who talked obsessively about sex, who used his power to belittle and harass them.
We can only hope for a steady stream of quality work like that. And finally, 4 weeks ago, in a story about how bike share schemes might be a terror threat, we said that Daniel Lukowitz of Calamity Monitoring did not appear to have any particular expertise in terrorism. He tells us he has in fact provided terrorism-related training to New South Wales Police, the security industry and other high-risk private sector groups and individuals. We're happy to put the record straight and to apologise. And you can read more about tonight's stories, including a response from the West Australian on our Facebook page or our website. You can contact me or Media Watch on Twitter. And don't forget to catch Media Bites on Thursday. But for now, until next week, that's it from us. Goodbye.